Well, we're moving on up to the east side, to a deluxe apartment in the sky. Moving on up to the east side. We finally got a piece of the pie.
And I think it's important for us to come together, community build, as an understanding, really, of the importance of community building, because without this, movements don't get built. That is, without people coming together and enjoying each other and understanding the relevance of themselves to other people, to seeing people that look like them, to seeing themselves represented in a space like this, to imagining yourselves as individuals, but also as a collective body that comes from many different places, together on this landscape of a prestigious university, is very, very important. And this is why so much of the work of some of the most incredible movements that we admire the most, some of that, the most important work, was about this kind of thing: getting together, laughing together, loving one another, and building each other up in humanity, because of the ways in which our humanity is so often denied every day by everything that we see in society. So for us to come together and say we're beautiful, to watch ourselves, on dancing and loving one another and doing all of the things that we're not supposed to do, right? To enjoy, to express in our bodies, in our voices, who we are. All of these things are in many ways a political act. So I wanted to first recognize that. But these three things I want to talk about. The first one is about the relationship that all of you know is so significant between all the various parts of Africa and the United States. And of course, these are things that in history, as a historian, these are the things that I first think about, not only in terms of my own personal experience in East Africa and West Africa and South Africa. I've traveled all over Africa and lived in more than one part. But I think about also all of the things I know about social movements in the United States. I think about how there is no greater source of inspiration for liberation than Africa, from specific movements that people studied and grew to understand, for the movements in the United States that have come to be emblematic of everything that is about liberation since like 1955 on up for Black people in the United States. And so there's ways in which the sources of the definitions of liberation from that were groomed, that were born, that were nurtured in different parts of Africa are so influential, so important here in the United States. And also thinking about what was possible. And this is another thing. And right now I'm teaching a course on civil rights. And I keep trying to tell my students, for those people who have never been outside of the United States, but also those people who don't have anybody in their family that has experiences like the experiences of your family members. You're not that far removed. Many of you are second generation or first generation, here in the U.S., and your parents may have migrated here. But many of you are not that far removed from experiences of exile, of forced migration, of genocide, of some privilege as well. But what's important for us to understand is how these things are perceived, not just by us, but then by other people, and what we can do with those perceptions, how we turn those things into action. And so I guess, still on that first component of what I want to say about unity, we have to acknowledge first, and really make everybody acknowledge that no matter how much the different parts of Africa and the different liberation movements have figured prominently in the history of the United States, Africa as a whole, as a continent, and of course I'm sure you get it all the time, people say, as a country, Africa is undersung, is understudied, is underrecognized, is undervalued. And I think all of us know that, even those of us who do not have immediate ties to Africa. So, in that, we have to recognize that there's this action of erasure. This is something that we talk about a lot of times in cultural studies, that there's this action of erasure that happens by not saying anything about it, or by undervaluing. There's an actual erasure that goes on that's systemic that's institutional, but that somehow, even when you don't feel it in every day, somehow it also reflects on you and your feeling about whether or not you belong in a place like this or in a landscape of the broader nation of the United States. The second thing I wanted to talk about, again, and I'm going to draw all these things together momentarily, is back to this notion of generation. And as I said, many of you are maybe one generation removed, if that, from these experiences of exile, of migration, as I said, but many of you are privileged too, because there is a certain level of privilege that goes on in former colonial states and countries in places like, especially in the belly of the colonial East in Africa, where privilege is a whole other level than what people have experienced here in the United States. And, you know, as any people who have history in one place and a future in another, right? Or we're all sort of standing at a crossroads in many ways, where we have, in a lot of instances, our parents who are so, you know, maybe still yearning for the country that they left. We have our parents talking to us in one year about the importance, how you could never know enough about where you're from. And then on the other hand, you have the reality of being here in the United States, or here in Goleta, or in Santa Barbara, on this campus. And what does that mean? What is the full import of those histories? What does that mean for your future? What does that mean for who you are? And if we think about how our futures are bound up with one another, and we consider that what those collective histories, what those parental stories mean for you, we come to really the significance of the origin of those places. And I guess the thing that is important for me to ask you and for you to reflect on is, you know, what is different about the story of your country, the story of your parents, the story of the collective movement of you and your people out to and your eventual ending up here in the United States? What is the difference between that and other stories of migration, of exile, of privilege, of genocide? There is something significant and unique about the pattern of colonialism and liberation in all parts of Africa that allow us to come together in a space like this, despite all of the differences that do happen, the very real differences between tribes, between countries in Africa. But what is it about being here? What is it about sort of the unifying thing that's more than just about exclusion, but is about the celebration of something different that you are bringing to this space that allows you to come together and feel something powerful? And I think that's really the last thing that I want us to think about before I bring this all together under this notion of unity. If you think about what specific ways of being and knowing are instructive for you as a child of Africa, then you come to understand, this is the third point, that there's a new kind of collectivity that's very powerful that has been created here. Because I think most black people in the United States that have never been to Africa, they go to Kenya thinking it would be the same as if I was visiting Ghana. I'm going to Africa after all. Or they go to Uganda and it's the same as being in Tanzania or in Cape Town, right? And so, of course, the idea of this monolithic Africa, not knowing that people are, you know, who look very similar are killing each other over a difference in tribes, right? Or that there are serious intertribal issues, ethnic issues that are going on all over the continent, but also some really incredible resistance movements and incredible consciousness-raising moments, especially like if you think about right now in Uganda. Of course, this is the news, always. It's usually the bad news that people capture that is coming out of Africa. It's rarely, look, who's on the cutting edge of doing this or this kind of movement or innovating in these kinds of strategies for social justice. But instead, we have this news out of Uganda, unfortunately, about this ban on homosexuals, which is like banning the air, right? But a ban on homosexuals and then this anti-pornography act. And keep that in mind for a second, because I want to come back to this in terms of this new collectivity that's being created here. In many ways, what you have here tonight and also in the organization is really not meant to be. Because it's not meant to be because of all of the kinds of internal and externalized factioning that happens in your various countries of origin. But it's also not meant to be, because too often in a diasporic way, our dreams about new worlds, new identities, new ways of knowing, new ways of being are crushed in very systemic and sanctioned ways. And this has been our history in many respects. This notion of Black love, of Black hope, of Black happiness that originates in the countries of Africa has always also been our story. And that's the kind